It took me a while to get used to the new direction that the God of War series took. It was only last year that I finally played the 2018's game, and I had to take a 5-month break and give it a second chance to actually finish the story. I had some issues with the camera, the enemy variety, and the pace of the narrative at some points. But at last, I did enjoy it and even got the platinum to complement the experience. And I can see where all the praise and the positive reviews come from, and even though it wasn't the best game that I played in my life, or even in 2023 for that matter, it is a very polished experience. And so I had high hopes that the next game in the series, the mighty Ragnarok, would address some of those issues and show some extra courage to innovate and change things up. But that's not the case. In an attempt to avoid being a trilogy, this game has a lot of story to tell, and it's just about 30% longer than the previous entry. And that rush to finish things up certainly shows, especially in how afraid Ragnarok is to break free from its predecessor. And this game seems to perfectly encapsulate the Sony sequel experience, which is a story-driven game with great visuals and a polished experience that does the absolutely minimum to evolve from the previous game and will not change your opinion in case you didn't like the other installments. Spider-Man 2 is another example of that. But now let's start on a positive note. I really enjoyed the atmosphere in this game. Muspelheim had already been my favorite realm in God of War 2018, precisely because it brought more color and contrast to the whole Nordic vibe. And now we'll get to explore forests, deserts, and warmer regions in general. There's much more color and life to it. Even the axe and the blades of chaos are brighter, and you can pick green and blue armors, which made this game much more visually stunning to me, aside from the obvious next-gen upgrade. I don't think the graphics evolved that much, especially if, like me, you played the last game on a PS5, but most of the visual features come from the new sceneries and vistas, and the loading times are also improved. The progress continues to be very linear, with a clear goal to be accomplished, but the game has a few new tricks regarding the ways in which you explore the realms. And one of the most annoying and boring segments in the previous game were the climbing parts, where you had to slowly carry Atreus up and down. But now, both Kratos and Atreus are able to use the Blades of Chaos and the bow respectively as a grappling hook, which allows them not only to reach places that would require some climbing in the previous game, but also to reach areas that wouldn't be accessible before. So not only does it add an extra dose of verticality, but it also means that you now spend much less time climbing in that scripted Uncharted way, and when you do have to climb, you're reminded that Atreus is now old enough to finally climb by himself. And when it comes to the puzzles, you still have to throw your axe and use the arrows, but there are some fresh challenges this time. You can use the blades to burn branches blocking the way, and you will also throw your axe at certain angles to reach other targets. Overall, it's a very subtle change, and the challenges remain very intuitive, with the game making a point of giving you lots of hints. So once again, it's not something that you have to worry about. But the most noticeable gameplay change in Ragnarok is that Atreus is now old enough to become a playable character, allowing for a new combat and narrative perspective. This addition refreshes the progression a little bit, however, one particular Atreus mission stands out for being the game's most tedious and drawn-out segment. Those who play the game will certainly know which part I'm talking about. Now, when it comes to the combat, I hope that they would address some of the issues in the sequel. After all, a good visibility during combat is not really much to ask. However, the combat remains constrained by the camera, and in Ragnarok I have to say that it did annoy me a bit more. In the previous game I felt it took a while before you faced a larger number of enemies, but now that's the case right from the beginning. And as if that wasn't enough, Kratos loses all his special attacks, armor upgrades, and health bar progress. I felt like they were just a few drinks away from making you have to unlock the Blades of Chaos all over again. And for about the first 12 hours of the game, you're basically re-unlocking everything you already had available in the previous game, upgrading the axe and the Blades of Chaos again, unlocking light and heavy runic attacks, and getting better armor. In other words, you're weaker and facing more enemies with the camera still stuck at the same close distance. The game can't seem to zoom out a bit during combat. The enemy variety, like the scenery, is better, offering both familiar faces with new tricks and entirely new enemy types. This variety is especially noticeable with the increased number of enemies that will throw stuff at you, forcing you to stay on the move during the combat. We still have arrows to indicate nearby enemies and incoming attacks, since it's impossible to see everything that's going on. Additionally, whoever you have as a companion will also provide audio cues to help you dodge or avoid attacks. Another change is that we now have different types of shields, such as a lighter one focusing on parrying and a heavier one focused on absorbing more damage. You can also use the shield to stun enemies by pressing L1 twice when a blue indicator appears on screen. Finally, we also have different types of Spartan Rage, with the traditional one similar to the previous game, another one that uses the rage bars to recover health, and a third one that increases your weapon damage for a brief moment. I didn't find one necessarily better than the others, it's more about using the one that best suits the situation, as you can switch directly from the menu whenever you want. And around 15 hours into the game, things finally become more balanced. You have some weapon upgrades, more health and rage bars and runic attacks available, but overall there are very minor changes, and if you played the previous game, you won't have any trouble getting adapted here. The RPG elements are still present, with Sindri and Brock's shop providing upgrades for weapons and runic attacks, something that even extends to your companions, and you can also unlock new types of attacks and combat options using experience points. In the previous game, Kratos was undoubtedly the protagonist, but in this one, at best, the spotlight is shared between Atreus and Kratos, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Atreus takes the center stage in this game. The main story advancements revolve around him, and Kratos now plays more of a supporting role, reacting to the unfolding events rather than driving the action forward. However, the game doesn't fully embrace this shift, and we still spend significantly more time playing as Kratos, so while the protagonism is shared, some sections with Atreus feel rushed and some with Kratos seem just like a filler. The lack of time is also evident in the number of characters present in the story. In the previous game, we had a core cast made of Kratos, Atreus, Sindri, Brock, Mimi, Freya and Baldur. And now, with the exception of Baldur, all the other remains, and we now have an additional 6 or 7 characters who appear throughout the campaign, which I won't mention specifically to avoid spoilers. In other words, we have a much larger cast, yet the game is only 30% longer than its predecessor, and Kratos still has the majority of the playtime. And we can better understand this by looking back at a Cory Balrog interview, in which he mentions the choice of not going for a trilogy. He said that the first game took 5 years to get made, and the second one would likely take a similar time, so he felt that 15 years for 3 games would be too much to ask. And sure, we can argue about the current state of the gaming industry, especially regarding AAA games, but what we get here is a game that has a lot to unpack, with pretty much no time to waste on the campaign. There's no longer that extra time to explain what's happening or to educate the player on Nordic mythology. I felt that sometimes, even during side conversations while exploring the environment, the game would throw in an important dialogue that you might miss if you're not paying close attention. At least the voice acting remains excellent and the characters are really charismatic. The chemistry between them is really great as well. And in the final hours, the story rockets forward and you will be more than motivated to resolve any remaining conflicts, to put it lightly. Overall, the story felt rushed, which is a shame because it had the potential for deeper development, and to make matters worse, that time limited is a self-imposed constraint, since we can safely say that people would stay for a trilogy. And after I finished the story, I decided to go for the Platinum, and the road to 100% served to reinforce my thoughts on the campaign, that it was rushed and too afraid to step out of its comfort zone. And it's clearly not a matter of laziness, considering the amount of secret areas and things to do for the Platinum Trophy. There are entire sections of Vanaheim and Alfheim that you never visit during the campaign, but this game has so much story to tell in such a short amount of time that the narrative forces you down a very linear path with no time to spare. The trophy list is pretty similar to the previous game. There are over 300 collectibles, some of which only become accessible after completing the story, and since there are no missable trophies and you can return to any area after completing the campaign, the ideal approach is to focus on the story first and then complete the rest later. And even though some collectibles are not mentioned in the trophy list, you still need to complete certain requirements. To fight the Berserker King, you must complete all the previous Berserker gravestones, and to reach the maximum amount of rage and health, you have to open all the chests. And there are still many similar collectibles to the previous game, such as Odin Ravens and the artifacts. I believe the Ragnarok Platinum Trophy is an excellent complement to the main experience, adding a sense of grandeur and exploration that, in my opinion, was lacking in the campaign. And with more time to delve into characters' motivations, relationships, and the Norse mythology as a whole, this Platinum journey also introduces interesting enemies, such as Berserkers, Dragons, the new Valkyrie Queen, and the Berserker King. The amount of additional content is truly impressive, making the Platinum Trophy a great option for those who want to continue exploring the game after the campaign. I generally prefer fast-paced games over slower ones, so I did enjoy God of War Ragnarok. The issue here is that I feel like this game stayed too much in its comfort zone. If you played the previous game, the learning curve in this one is practically non-existent. And even when it does take some risks, like having you play as Atreus, it does the bare minimum. It gives Atreus a lot of protagonism, but it doesn't compensate for that with playtime. And I can't help but think that a lot of this could be solved if the game was longer. If instead of 46 hours in total for both games, we had 60 hours split into 3 games. There will be much more time to explain everything and even get the player used to spending more time with Atreus and take more risks with new mechanics and new ways to explore the environment. For a game with so much story to tell and a gigantic budget, the developers had little room for missteps. Any change in gameplay or exploration could go very wrong, so we're left with a game that's quite similar to the previous one and with a story that sometimes feels rushed. But other than that, I don't think there's much to say. This game is a critical success and really enjoyable one. It's a super cinematic experience with no loading screens, mechanics that work well, and lots of accessibility options, making it an inclusive experience for any type of player. It also doesn't try to sell you anything, there are no microtransactions, and I didn't notice any performance issues on the PS5. But I believe that as time goes on and more people decide to replay Ragnarok, or even for those who are new to the Nordic era of the franchise and play both games back to back, as was my case, I think this rush and this safe approach will become more evident. And as for the future of the franchise, I don't think Atreus has what it takes to become the main character. So we're pretty much left with the possibility of remasters of the Greek era games, which would be nice since they are stuck in the PS2 and PS3, but could also go very wrong. And if the remasters are actually happening, I hope they do respect the source material and stay away from making ground changes to the game just to please the modern audiences. Just give us a frame and resolution bump, PS5 compatibility, perhaps a PC version, and call it a day. Either way, we'll just have to wait and see what happens next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.